Welcome to Love Punch, where I'm challenging leaders, entrepreneurs, and creatives to make a lasting impact. I'm your host, Ruby Fremont, and I'm here as a catalyst for you, the new generation of thought leaders. Join me each week as I dive into raw conversations with real impact makers. Hey everyone, we are back and I am incredibly excited. Like I woke up this morning and I bounced out of bed because I was so excited to talk to this woman. And we just recently connected, but it was because I kind of cyber stalked her for a little bit and thought to myself, I need to have her on the Love Punch podcast. So Trudi Lebron is a coach for entrepreneurs and leaders who want to use their work to create more equity, sustainability, and community in the world. Her combination of life, work, and academic experiences give her a unique blend of tools that she uses to support people in finding ways to create a bigger impact with their business, learn to see the world with an equity lens, and overcome some of the most challenging circumstances. Trudi believes in the transformational power of coaching and believes that coaches can play a big part in creating equity in our society. This is so important to discuss nowadays. So without further ado, Trudi, welcome to the Love Punch podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you here. We could start at so many places, but I kind of just want to dive right in, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, let's do it.
So the topic of like race and privilege is a super hot and charged up topic right now, especially in the online space. And, one of the biggest reasons why I wanted you here is because I deeply admire and respect the way in which you show up for this and communicate it with the world. But, and just as someone observing, it feels like there's just a lot of anger and it's being charged to use sort of this like ammunition versus education. And I'm really curious to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I think that you're absolutely right that this is a topic that is just like everywhere, both online and in like the real world. Not that online isn't real, but the physical that's real too. Online is real too. And people have the right to be angry. Like I get angry sometimes too. And there's a lot of people talking about race and diversity, and not everyone is an educator, right? Not everyone has to own the responsibility of educating people. The online world is a space where we can show up and just kind of like say what we want to say and vent where we need to vent. And some of us use that to teach and coach and to do things like me. I use social media almost exclusively for that kind of purpose. And other people use it for other things. And so, I don't know that there's like a right way to do it. I think remembering that not everybody is responsible for educating. And so allowing people to have the space to be angry is important too.
Yeah, that's super important to share. I find that often at least in the spiritual community, a lot of people like to bypass anger.
Yeah.
And they make you feel wrong for feeling it.
Yeah.
And that's not okay. People have a right. We're built to feel anger for a reason. It's part of our processing.
Right.
So when it comes to what's come to the surface now, with privilege, with race, with equity, what is your take on this? Fully loaded question.
That's a whole lot of stuff. I can write a book on that. Well,
and you will. FYI.
Yeah, and I will. Yes, in one day. So I guess the first thing I'll say is that my take, I guess, is that we live in a world, and let me preface this by saying that like I live in the United States, and that a lot of what I will say and a lot of like things that have shaped my experience are very United States specific. So I'll say that first because a lot of people hear that and like, oh, it's not like that here. Well, I live in the United States.
Right.
So that's kind of where my lens is coming from. So in the United States, we live in a country that was built on racism, right? there were white folks that came to the United States that took land from people, right? That brought other people from other countries, people of color, Black people from other countries, to literally build a lot of what we have right now. Half of our country used to be Mexico, right? Like so much of our country was Mexico. So the structures that we have in place, or the historical structures that we have in place, kind of came from a place where there was a group of people who were the owning class and the empowered class, and then everyone else was disempowered. And that's our history, right? And that history has really, really deep roots. And so much of the way that we live today is informed, directly informed and influenced by that pattern. We haven't done a good job at like undoing it. So that is like baseline, and that's not really like a lot up for a lot of debate, right? Those are facts. Like,
those are facts.
These are
straight up. Yeah, this
right.
happened.
That's not my opinion.
Yeah, we can't argue that at all. Like you can't argue the fact that slavery exists. You can't argue the fact that we live on stolen land. We can't argue any of that. These are actual facts.
Right. So if we can start there and, and just kind of agree that those are facts and that so much of the country was built on that, then we can kind of see ramifications of that, right? And, so many examples of how the current system that we have just kind of replicate a lot of those belief systems and a lot of those structures. Like we just haven't done a good job at fixing that. So that's kind of like the way I see the world and the way that I try to help people. If we're ever going to make things better, like we just have to acknowledge that are the conditions that we have. If we're not clear on the conditions that we have, we can't fix any problems.
Right. And I think that's one of the biggest issues at hand right now is that within this movement, let's call it a movement, there are people who are opening up and acknowledging it. And there are those who are not and are just flat out like not even resisting, but denying.
Yeah. And that's like, I don't know how anyone can deny, like we just have so much history and like so much evidence that people have been systematically marginalized that I don't know how like we can, I don't know how to reconcile that. Like, I don't know how people can still say like, oh, that's not really a thing. Like racism isn't real. Or my favorite, right? Like talking about racism, like actually is what creates racism. Like, that's not how that works. Like,
right. That's usually from the people who are like in the deep end of the LOA. I don't want to talk about this because I'm just going to bring it up and we're past that and love and light and everything's great.
Yeah. For real.
Yeah. So, and the way that I look at it, because I've witnessed a lot online and a lot of people getting super defensive and showing up in their denial, the way that I see them is often that this is just where they're at in their journey. Like people react with a level of comprehension that they're at in their lives. And a lot of people aren't there yet. But then what? Because this to me feels like it's not like, how do we learn how to do this? How do we dismantle? How do we dismantle all this shit that has been built upon this foundation of like stolen land and slavery?
Well, I guess that's like my life's work, right? It's like, not my whole life's work, but a big part of the work that I do right now is about looking at how to actually do that. Like what are ways that we do that at really big scale? So some of the work that I do is with like entire school districts, right? Where we look at like the systemic oppression and marginalization of students of color in school districts, right? And that's like huge. And then also like, how can one person do it in their coaching practice? You know what I mean? Like, so I'm kind of looking at like all of these different ways. And the first point that I'll make is like, you can't undo it unless you acknowledge that it's real. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is like acknowledging your place in the system, right? That's like such a big part of it, is like doing the identity work to kind of say like, I am a white person, or I am a person of color. This is the privilege that I have. This is how I've been marginalized. What are my biases? Like, let me own those, because everyone has biases, right? Like biases are just a regular thing. You can have a bias over, like one color for another color, you know what I mean? It's just like a preference. But doing the work to really understand your biases and understand that like the world has taught you these certain things that you kind of have to unpack and like let go of what's not serving you and relearn mindset patterns. And what gets to me, especially in like the coaching space, right? And like kind of in all different sectors of coaching, is that we really accept that the mindset work to be true. Particularly, I'll give you a very specific example.
Yes, please.
Particularly around the idea of money mindset, right? So people will talk and just agree pretty much universally that like everyone has learned money patterns, and like some people hold negative attitudes about money and so they can't attract it, and that's hardly ever argued, like whether or not that's real. People just usually kind of accept that like we have learned patterns around money and finances that we've learned from like our families, and that we have to kind of undo a lot of that stuff in order to kind of train ourselves to have new money mindset patterns, right? So that's pretty common. The same thing is true for race. Like it's the exact same thing. Like you have learned things, all of us have learned things unconsciously from our families, from our communities, about race, about identity, about socioeconomic status, that are unconscious, that we have to like interrogate and unlearn sometimes and replace with like newer, healthier concepts. It's the same thing.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing. And it's, I think when people hear that for the first time, it's easy to get defensive right away because they take it like it's a personal attack. Like, no. I'm not racist. No. I don't believe this.
Yeah.
But it's so much, it's so much more than that, Yeah. I remember reading this article years ago, and it was a dad, and it was like in a men's blog, and he had written an apology to Black men. And he said he was walking out of a store with his daughter to their car, and he saw a Black man, and he moved his daughter aside, and then realized that this man had his own child, and stopped in the moment and was like, what the fuck was I doing? This is something that I didn't know that I had picked up. This is something that I wasn't aware of. And what am I teaching my kids?
Right.
That article, when I read it, or that blog, was eye-opening for me. I mean, because we do have all of these things that are ingrained, whether you want to believe it or acknowledge it or accept it or not, they are ingrained because we've all been raised in this like systematic culture.
Yeah. And it's also just the way our brains work, right? So I'm a PhD candidate in social psychology. So I've like taken all the course, like I know how people work, I know how brains work, I know how learning happens. And like we create patterns and connections between things that we learn, they become structures in our brain. Like, so it's natural that you associate feelings and experiences with people and places. It's the same thing. Like, how you hear a song from middle school and you can like remember the exact place that you were when you were like dancing in the hallway, or it's, your brain has made a connection between the song and the experience, and that has been reinforced over time. And it's the same thing, that your brain has been conditioned to understand race or color or language and like these certain concepts, and they've been reinforced through TV, through media, through different experiences, through people in your family just talking about it around you. It's literally the way your brain works and is wired. And you can undo those things. Like you can retrain your brain to have healthier patterns around all of these things.
Yeah. And so really then the way you're saying it is this is just a retraining of your brain. But in order to retrain your brain, you first have to acknowledge what it is that you are retraining.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
Yeah. So, I mean, so there are a lot of excuses thrown around there as defense mechanisms. Like, oh, well, I'm a person of color, so I can't be racist. Or I have a Black friend. Or I have, a person of color client. Or, all this shit is thrown around.
Yeah.
And let me, and I had shared this with you before, but I want to share it with my audience. When Black Lives Matter first came out, years ago. So first of all, my preface is I'm Canadian. I moved to the United States in 2013. This is very important because Canada has a very, very different history
Right.
and a very different socioeconomic situation. Like, we really are a country that honors so many different cultures. And I had all my friends were people of color, and everything was I don't know, like, we just didn't see things this way. So when I moved to the
Mm-hmm.
US, part of me was kind of in this culture shock of like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
And the first time I saw Black Lives Matter, I wrote on Facebook, all lives matter. I was one of those people. And my girlfriend, who's half Black, she called me and she said, Ruby, I just want to educate you on the history of this. And
Yeah.
I said, okay, because I was open. And she educated me, and she took the time and with love and patience and compassion and shared everything with me. And that was what changed it all. She shared the history of the United
Yeah.
States, what's been going on, what this has been built on. And so the reason I mention that is because I took the time to listen and to be open to the fact that I was wrong.
Right.
And it doesn't matter, like, I could have played the excuse of, well, I'm a person of color, because I am 100%, and I have Black friends. I could throw that out there.
Yeah.
But that's like not even being open to the opportunity to expand and learn and try and better the system that we are all living in currently. So
Exactly.
I mean, there's like this golden question, like, if you are someone, a leader, or like someone in the online space, or a coach, or someone who has like even just like a great following on social media, like, what can you start to do to like do your part in dismantling it?
Yeah. So, one is really acknowledging, that's the first step. The second is like what we call like doing your work. So like understanding your identity, processing your bias. And, there are coaches that can help people do that. Like I run a class that helps people do that, but there's more than just, there's other folks who do this kind of work.
Mhm.
Um, Understand where you are, and just start like asking questions and like looking to understand what is happening in the world. So exactly the example that you just gave, where you're just
Mhm.
really listening, right? One of the biggest pieces of feedback that I get is that like, well, I just don't know what to say. Like, I want to
Right.
be, I want to be open. I am open. I align my values with, with around equity and justice. And
Mhm.
I just don't know what to say. And
Right.
sometimes just even that, like saying, I don't know what to say, is a great first place to start,
Because
because
that's like the honest answer.
that's the honest answer. And you're saying, like, you're demonstrating that like you're still brave enough to acknowledge that these things are happening, and you're not just like living in a bubble like, oh, I'm just gonna talk about like empowerment and spirituality and like
Mhm.
ignore that all these other things are happening. And the
Mhm.
reason that that's important is because it's alienating to people of color. Well, there's a lot of reasons it's important, but one of them is, if you're committed to diversity in your work and inclusivity in your work, if you just kind of carry out your life and business like that stuff isn't happening, and the people in your community are people being affected by racism, or by families being separated at the border, or mass incarceration, or
Mhm.
any of these things, if you don't acknowledge it, it makes people feel unseen, like you don't connect
Definitely.
with them or their story, and you're not even concerned. So just even saying like, I see that this is happening and I'm still trying to understand it, that's wonderful.
Yeah, because even as you were saying that, um, I can think of leaders that I have followed in the past, like, couple
Mm-hmm.
of years, who don't say shit online when, when the stuff happened at the border, when all the riots and protests were happening with Black Lives Matter, when, the recent outrage with Nia. It's just been,
You there?
oh, yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
Okay.
I think we cut out for a second.
Yeah, for a
Let me
second.
just
Okay.
let me just go on with my thought. So, there's been leaders who are like next gen leaders,
Yeah.
leaders of today, who a
Yeah.
lot of people, millennials especially, are following, who aren't saying shit. And I feel, and maybe I'm wrong, this is just my perception. My perception is that maybe they're too scared because either they're afraid of being judged, they're afraid of losing their followers.
That could be it.
Right. And so I think we have a lot of those people. And I think we have a lot of those people listening to this episode right now, too. So
Mm-hmm.
for them, like, where do they begin? Like, because I feel like that's like, first you got to dismantle your belief system, like internally.
Right. And that's why it's important to start really with you, like before you start like taking on these things, because you really need to understand like where you stand. And if you're afraid of losing followers, like, well, let's talk about like, what is that about?
Mm.
Are you afraid of losing followers because you have a lot of people in your community who are going to like be angry that you're talking about race and discrimination? Like, is that, you know, and if that's the case, like, I don't know, like, I think as I'm listening, I'm like, I wouldn't want those people in my community.
Yeah.
Like, so for me, it's like, I want to be really explicit about where I stand, because I don't want those people like in my environment. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want those. I want to be super explicit about where I stand and what my belief system is. And so if people are afraid to kind of take a stand for their beliefs because they're going to lose followers, like, that's just a conversation that I would say really needs to happen. I don't know, because maybe you're holding on to some internal bias yourself,
Right.
like that just needs to kind of be processed through. Like, that's the immediate thing that I think.
Right.
And the other thing is, you know, from a business perspective, I have found that being explicit has actually served me really well, because it's the same idea around like a niche audience. Like when you can speak directly to the people that you're seeking out, people feel like, oh yeah, I connect with her. Like, she speaks my language. He speaks my language. He cares about me. They care, you know? And so people just feel like more connected because they feel like their belief system is aligned. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like auto filtration.
Right.
The more real you are about your beliefs and putting that out there, the more aligned your clientele becomes.
Yeah.
Your audience becomes, because you automatically filter out those who aren't really meant to be there. And like, really, do you really want to have those people there? If this is something that is important to you, and that's why I love what you said about doing the work on yourself first. You got to get clear on what those internal beliefs are. And if you're not clear, then take this as an opportunity right now to do the work to get clear, either with a coach or on your own, but start dissecting like, what is all this shit that you're carrying around, and what's actually really important to you.
Yeah. And why is it there? Like, you know, there could be all kinds of stuff that is connected to all kind of belief systems that you're holding on to, you know?
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's funny because until all of this kind of came to the surface, like, I think about a year and a half ago is when everything kind of exploded. That was the first time where I like looked at my business with fear. I was like, oh my God, what the fuck am I doing to contribute to this? And how can I shift things? And I think, number one, when you're a person of color, we naturally attract other people of color, which is something that I notice. However, with that being said, I also noticed that I wasn't talking enough about diversity and inclusion. And so that was something that I told myself, well, I want to educate myself more on this, because this does feel important to me. Because growing up, like, I hated when I felt like the odd one out, or I hated when I was dished out racist remarks. I hated all that shit. Like, we hate feeling excluded. Everyone wants to feel included. So we have to do our part in creating that sort of a space, especially as coaches, which is what you were saying. And I'm really, because I know that you work a lot with coaches with this, and I want to know, like, from your experience, what has been like the number one block that they've come to you with, or the number one struggle?
I think the biggest one is that like people are really looking for a space to like just ask questions without being accused of being called a racist or being, you know, like being misunderstood, because people genuinely have questions. Like, they hear a lot There's a lot of conflicting advice, like a lot of different opinions about things. And people want a space where they can just be like, hey, I said this thing, someone got upset about it. I don't really understand why. Can you help me figure it out?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I think that has been the biggest thing, is like people are really just looking for a safe space to just ask these questions and to talk. And then the next one that people tend to have a little bit of block around, that we move through it pretty quickly, because I think it's a simple mindset adjustment.
Yeah.
Sometimes a lot of these things conflict with a lot of the spiritual values that people hold on. So a lot of the teaching. So for example, a lot of the law of attraction ideas, and also like the idea that a lot of people hold on to, that like we all came into this world choosing the body that we're in, knowing that we would have certain experiences, and that we all kind of showed up in this world to learn these like certain lessons. And so we chose our life, right? And that, and then that's it, right? And so when
I'm laughing because like I literally just did an episode on this and it was just released this week. Please keep going.
So a lot of people hold on to that. And I am not like a spiritual leader. Like I don't claim to be any of that. Like and I also don't claim to have all the answers, right? So what I ask people to do is, I don't want to tell people, well, you should like let go of your belief system. Like, I don't know that that's an appropriate thing to do either. But what I ask people to do is practice this concept called both and thinking, right? So you can have an experience and I can have an experience, and those experiences are different, and they are both true, right? So if you believe that everybody picks their life fully, well knowing like whatever experiences they're going to have, understand that like that does not take away the pain that any one person is experiencing in a moment, right? So if I say to you, I went with my family to see an apartment and the landlord was discriminating against us because we're a family of color, which has happened to me, by the way, telling me that I picked that experience before I got here doesn't help me process the pain. You know what I mean? Like find a place to live. Like it doesn't take away the fact that that experience happened.
Definitely.
And so as coaches, what I hope to do is, there's thunder. If you hear stuff, it's thunder. Like
I can hear the thunder. FYI listeners, thunder.
Like thunder. It is about to downpour. Like I'm sitting by my window in my office and I'm like, oh, there's going to be a storm. Okay. Anyway, so as coaches, we want to have a toolbox of approaches and strategies that we can support our clients through, right? And so that spiritual belief is one tool, right? And so we need to understand that when someone is in pain and telling you that they have an experience that's connected to racism or misogyny or whatever kind of way that they have been marginalized and oppressed, right? That tool is not the appropriate tool to support the client at that time. You need to honor the pain, help them process the emotion of what has happened, give them some strategies to like move forward. And then maybe later, if you're in that kind of a spiritual coaching relationship, maybe later you can revisit it and kind of talk about that. But that's not the moment for that. Yeah. So I think that when we have that lens, it makes us better coaches.
Yeah. And you say it so beautifully. I like to sum it up as like, we just have to meet people where they're at.
Absolutely.
And if we try and throw that whole, like, you picked this life, when someone is going through like a deep pain or they have deep wounds and they haven't worked through it, like that is going to create further damage than initiate healing. What they need to hear is like compassion and so that they can get to the place where they can start feeling a bit more empowered. And so that brings me to my next the next thing I want to visit, which is with all of these emotions, like, so it kind of feels like in a visualization, like a volcano erupted, right? And it's like, finally, people have the perceived freedom to speak about this. You know what I mean? Like, it's like the domino effect. One person spoke about it, now another, now everyone's speaking about it. And so everyone is finally feeling that anger and that frustration and fueling it, which can be intense for people who are on the outside of it. You know what I mean? Like, people who are not in that, but they're witnessing it. And so how do we navigate through that? Because I am so with we need to honor the anger, because the anger itself has been repressed for years.
Right.
But at the same time, how do we navigate through this in a way that feels like we are actually doing something to dismantle? I don't even know if that question's clear, but how do we navigate through this intensity?
So I have a couple of ideas. So the first thing is, like, if you've processed through like your identity and your belief system, and you've come to the conclusion that like you don't believe in racism, and like you don't, and like this isn't like a thing that you want a discussion that like you care to address, like that this is not one of the areas that is like important to you. I hope that nobody feels that way. But like, if that's the conclusion that you come to, then my suggestion is to never speak about it. Like, if you see people having that argument, just don't even engage, because you don't have a commitment enough to that issue, right? Like, you don't have the baseline even agreement that this is real. So it's like arguing with someone who has a different religion than you. Then you
like, don't go in and like drop a comment. Don't do anything.
Don't even drop a comment, because it's not your place. Like, it's not something you believe in, right? Like, it's not something that you're committed to fixing. So like, don't engage. Like, it's not your place. The second thing is that if you have decided that it is something that you care about, which I hope everybody feels, is like, think about like the extent to which you want to engage. So if, like, for example, I personally believe that coaches have this tremendous power to really kind of influence the lives of people, like of individuals and communities of people. And so consider, like, who's in your coaching practice? Do you have all white clients? Do you have mostly white clients? Like, is your audience diverse? Why not? Like, are there things that you can do to make it more inclusive? I don't know, like, and for everybody, the answer to that is different. Like, some people offer scholarships, some people do different kinds of programming, some people change their marketing and outreach strategy. They're like, make it more inclusive and diverse, right? Now, there is work to do in order to do that successfully. Like, you can't just say, like, always, one of my things is like, you can say, I welcome everyone, I work with everyone, this is for everyone. But that's different than saying, like, I've designed a program that is meant to serve everyone. That those are different things. So if you're committed at that level that you want to actively do something, like, diversify your client base. Like, if you're teaching business, like, Black women are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs, and they have the least access to resources to like business training. So if you're a business coach, like, what can you do? Like, you have a skill that you can like teach, right? Like, that you can offer. So like, how can you make sure that you're like getting that information to people, right? And, I'm not saying that you give all your stuff away. Like, I'm a business person too. Like, I teach business. I do all this equity work, but really, I was doing equity in the nonprofit and education field because the coaching industry was just not ready for this. Right? Like, when I was doing it, my coaching practice started as doing business coaching for social impact entrepreneurs. So people coming out of education in the nonprofit world who wanted to start businesses that like made an impact, right? And so it just so happened that like my two worlds kind of merged because of the social climate that we're in. But like, how can you bring your skills, your knowledge to people that need it, that don't have access to it?
Yeah, that's so good. You had said earlier, you can say, I offer, I work with everyone. And there are people who do that, and I've seen that, but then their programs and the offers
Yeah.
don't reflect that.
Right.
They
It's
say I
like you
work with
brought,
everyone, but I only have 6-figure coaching options or
right.
whatever.
Right. It's like you have like a dinner party and you invite like an open invitation to everyone, but you don't have like options for vegetarians or
Right.
like, you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like you should know already that like, if you invite 20 people, you're probably going to have somebody in your group that's like vegetarian or has a food
Yes.
allergy. Like it's different to say like, oh, you're welcome here. And actually I've considered your needs.
Mm-hmm.
That's different.
Yes. And I love that example because we've all met that like angry vegan at a
Yeah.
party or a retreat with some who like lashes out and said, you didn't think enough to feed me. Hello. Now take that and put it into perspective with what's going on in the world today.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. You have provided some amazing tools, I think, for people to get started on this.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that people who are listening up until right now too are the ones who are really interested in this.
Yeah.
And
If they've made it this far.
yeah, if they've made it this far.
Yeah.
And I just want to share that like I'm learning too. And I post about it. I probably do more on Twitter than anywhere else. Twitter is where I go to for more of my social justice work. But the reason being is because I'm still educating myself. And
And here's
so,
the thing.
yeah,
Here's the thing, Ruby. Everybody is, right?
right. We're all just learning.
Everybody's learning. So creating equity is a practice.
Mm-hmm.
It's a practice in that it's something that we do, right? Not just like a mindset we adopt, but it's something that we do. And it's also something that is imperfect. And so we have to practice doing it every day. We make a commitment to doing a little better, right? So yeah, nobody has it all the way right. If we did, we'd be in a better circumstance. We'd be in better circumstances.
Yeah, it's like the people who are like, well, what do we do to fix it? It's like, well, I don't think we've landed on the answer yet. And I don't think we're
No.
ever going to land on the answer yet because right now we're in a state of acknowledgement. Like,
Yeah.
we're in a state of that, period. People just need to wake up and acknowledge, and we can start building that foundation to unravel from everything else.
Exactly. In my kind of consulting work with schools and bigger organizations, I'm constantly asked like, well, are there any schools that we can look at who have like got it right? And the answer is like, no, like we don't even have a model of an equitable school. We don't have a good model for a school that has equal kind of representation of students of color and white students who do well, like who do equally well. Like we don't even have that in public schooling. So yeah, everybody's working on it.
Right. So we need to bring a little bit of Canada down here.
I mean, Canada has its problems too, though.
We do have our share of problems. I actually, the more I dive into this, the more blessed I feel, but also the more detached I feel from what's been going on. And I love that you said we're all just learning, including yourself. I think that's really important. Like, I don't think anyone has all the answers because the answers we're not there yet. We're not there yet.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to remember that like we can learn and do at the same time.
Yes.
Right. It's not just like I have to sit here and figure it all out and one day I'll do something about it. Like we can learn and try to figure it out while taking steps to make our businesses more diverse, to make our offers more equitable, to get our work out there. And you know what? You don't even have to make significant changes to your business model. So for example, some of the things that I do is like, I go and talk to high schools and I don't like charge them, right? If I have to travel, like, I ask them to support the travel, but like, I try not to, especially locally, if a teacher calls me or a school calls me and says, hey, we want you to come, we'd love to have you come and talk to like our high school class just about like starting your own business or being a teen mom or something like that. Like if I have the time in my calendar, I just go. Right. And that's like, and then by the kids like meeting me,
Mm-hmm.
it's an example of, you know, someone who has like taken another path. Like it's just an example, you know,
Yeah.
for them to kind of hold on to. So there's, you know, there's ways for people to offer what they do in a way that doesn't like disrupt their business model or anything like that. Like there's
Right.
so many options.
Yeah. Like what you're saying is, because I think for a lot of people, the fear might be, oh shit, I have to change everything. Well,
No.
no, it's not that. Just start making a few little integrations and shifting things and
Right.
implementing different things. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Or like making a post saying, I don't know what to say about this. I'm
Right.
still learning.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, Trudy, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to share with me and to share with our audience. I am so I have so much deep respect for the work that you're doing in the world, and it's so important today more than ever. Um, Write that fucking book, please. I will buy your first 10
Well, thank
copies.
you.
And
I'll hold you to that.
yeah, why don't you tell our listeners where they can stalk you online?
Yeah, so folks, the best place to find me is on Facebook. So Trudi, Trudi, this is Trudi with an I. Lebron, Lebron, like LeBron James. Super easy to find online. You can also find, if this is the kind of thing that you're really interested in learning more about, you can check out our podcast, the podcast that I co-host. It's called That's Not How That Works, which I said earlier, even in this part. It's like one of those things that I'm just constantly saying. So yeah, and that's not how that works. So check us out. Yeah, that's the best place to find me.
Thank you so much. Now, Trudy, at the end of every single episode, I like to throw a love punch, which is just a short, quick, punchy affirmation reminder quote to our audience that kind of sums up our entire talk. So, Trudy, what is your love punch for today?
Growth is on the other side of discomfort.
Mm. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Trudy.
You're most welcome.
I appreciate you. And I know our listeners um, will have gained a lot from this episode. To our listeners, thank you so much for joining me and Trudy on today's episode of Love Punch, where I'm challenging thought leaders, influencers, and entrepreneurs like you to make a lasting impact. If you love this episode, please, please share it with a friend, share it with your online following, share it. And don't forget to hit subscribe. If you want a little extra love from me, drop a review on iTunes. If you have any questions about today's episode, please reach out to Trudy or myself on social media. All of the links will be in the show notes. And I will see you all back here next week with a brand new episode of Love Punch.